Hello and good afternoon, good morning for those joining us from different parts of the world. This is the CFFLive session in the August, the Tech Tuesday program. I wanted to share with you a very interesting topic that I believe we all care about, and that's how can we make the cyberspace passwordless? Well, in the few sessions, we have had several types of discussions, primarily starting with the solutions around responding to the cyber issues with pandemic, with COVID-19 response. We walked through a little bit of the recovery journey for getting our businesses online and being able to ensure that we are able to perform with the same amount of agility in the cyberspace as we did in our physical spaces. Then we went on in July, if you remember, across several leadership journeys, and we have had serious discussions about what is going to be the new norm. And as we moved on to August, we thought we bring in some of the key technology issues that you have to deal with. And as more and more people get logged in and become, cyber citizens, and the corporations probably are going to continue on in this new norm of having people online, we'll have to make that easier. Well, in this journey, I've been joined by many friends, and one of them is who we'll hear from today, Diana Kelly. In fact, we have met more in other parts of the world than than in the US. And we met in Israel earlier this year, and then in Riyadh, and the Global Cyber Forum, and then of course at San Francisco and RSA. And then all of a sudden we find ourselves logged up in a home and finding an excuse to get together. This couldn't be better. So Diana, welcome to the program. Great to have you, and looking forward to speaking with you about your journey. So let's talk about a little bit of your role, yourself, and your background, and learn more.
Sure. Thanks so much, Val, for having me, and everybody here. Thanks for tuning in. And yeah, as you said, it's definitely been a big change to have to start addressing people and having conversations with the world from at home, because one of the nice things about being out in the world and talking to different people is to get that experience and hear what people are going through in person. So thank you for recreating a little bit of that virtually here online, and so we can have the opportunity to talk with each other and with the audience. A little bit on my background. I'm a 30-year professional in IT, just over 30 years now. I say that as a professional because I actually fell in love with IT as a child. So I was self-taught in terms of programming, and I'm old enough that when I first got online, it was back in the days of the DARPANET. So the internet wasn't even really a thing yet. It was the late 70s, and it was part of the DARPANET. And just absolutely fell in love with the opportunity of what you could do when computers bring people together. So exactly what all of us are experiencing now in COVID, and using our systems to be able to communicate. That's what really got me excited back in the 70s about the opportunity and what could be done with technology. And when I started working, I actually started very, very much hands-on. So I actually ran cables through walls and ceilings, and it works for networking. Back in the day, when you wanted to add memory to a Mac, for example, you had to use this butterfly tool to open it up, cut a wire on the motherboard, and then insert the additional memory. I mean, it was like sort of when I talk about this sometimes with people who are a little bit newer to the technology world, it sounds almost like I'm talking about, and then we got into our horse-drawn buggy and went across the plains or kind of thing, because it's technology has advanced so much. But it was a really great experience, I think, being able to access those systems and see how technology grew up. And it's been really fun to see some things that we weren't really able to do back then. In the 80s and the 90s, the concept of passwordless was really it wasn't viable because the technology wasn't there yet. So it's great to see as technology advances, what else we can do with it and how it can make people's lives easier. And over the course of my career, I've been at the Big Four. I was a manager in financial services consulting. I have worked as an analyst, a research analyst. So I led the security risk management team for Burton Group, which is now the Gartner for Technical Professionals team, or as I sometimes would joke, the analysts who sell the research by the pound, because these are the really in-depth.
Hey, they're listening to.
Yeah, not that sort of simple, like, oh, here's just 1 or 2 pages of data sheets. We were the very, very thick, detailed documents. And before I joined Microsoft 3 years ago, I was at IBM for just about 5 years, where I was the global executive security advisor, went around the world and talked to customers and did public speaking and thought leadership, and also built and managed the research publication process for IBM Security. And then 3 years ago, made the move over to Microsoft, where I'm the cybersecurity field CTO. And I spend, again, a lot of times out talking to customers, understanding what their biggest problems are, helping with advisory, and also doing public speaking.
Well, great to hear the background, because that lays down the picture for what you have gone through and what you have been through. So that both as a technologist as well as a leader, we can shape the journey forward. And I believe, when you're talking about passwordless, we are talking at pretty much what we would have been thought like bleeding edge, but it's already here, right? And then you just explained your whole experience of running cables. So there is really a physical thing to make it happen, right? So, and you have the whole transcending journey of the actual physical infrastructure behind this whole digital interface that we see is so real. So let's talk about a little bit of your vision for this, and I believe there are a lot of aspirations for people, and there is a lot of frustrations. In fact, remembering 20 to 30 different passwords, and not initially there was a push that use strong, long passwords and complex, and then everybody had their own the definition of complexity. So really difficult life. We still live in it. What's your vision for getting away from it, where you can actually have a passwordless cyberspace?
Yeah, you make an excellent point about the number of passwords that people have to remember and the complexity. And I'm actually not one of these people that hates passwords, which may sound a little bit surprising, but I don't hate passwords per se. They're actually quite good for what we needed them to do back 30 years ago, for example. The nice thing about a password is, as long as you don't have to write it down or tell anybody, it can in fact stay secret in your mind. It's also very changeable. So you can, because we're human beings with creative imaginations, right? We can think of infinite numbers of passwords. So passwords, for a lot of what you need in the identity, authentication, verification space, can do quite a lot that's positive. I think the issue became around when it wasn't a password that we were asked to remember. It became 10, 15. I remember it growing over time, and even in business and personally. And in business now, because I've worked at companies that either support entirely single sign-on or at Microsoft passwordless, I don't need to think about my work password. I haven't had to think about my work password for a while, but I contrast that with what I have at home. And my home, because I use a password wallet for personal use, and that password wallet's got a couple of hundred different passwords, which is very shocking. How does that happen? Well, every time you sign up with a new financial services institution or a new healthcare provider or a new retail site, it's another password, it's another password. So that's really the drive for passwordless, and the vision for passwordless is to take people a step beyond the single sign-on space, where you still were having a lot of connections into the back end, and people still had to remember their one password. Very often, there just wasn't the extensibility to as many systems as people wanted, so you had sort of reduced password rather than single sign-on. Reduced sign-on. I talked to a lot of companies who said, yeah, really it's reduced sign-on. And passwordless is saying, look, the technology has changed. The way that we use that technology has changed. So let's really rethink and reimagine how we authenticate. And one of the main things that's changed is that we do connect very much, most of us are carrying around one piece of hardware that is unique to us. We tend not to share our phones. And very often our laptops are also not shared. So we can use these as a factor of authentication, whether it's with a Surface device, for example, and a trusted module where a cryptographic, secure private cryptographic key is stored and then unlocked through a biometric or something like through Windows Hello, or if we're using Fast Identity Online and intersecting with the ability to capture biometric information on something like a phone, we're able to add additional factors of authentication that really weren't possible before. So the vision is to take this need to remember passwords, complex passwords, as you noted, and advance with the technology to give a very seamless experience to users.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right, because I grew up in this industry of identity, what we call identity access management, right? Enterprise identity access management, seen the whole evolution. Millions of dollars spent on making sure that the end users are they don't only have like controlled access, but also their access, the user experience is good, right? It never went anywhere close to, but I think we are getting with more and more, as you said, from from single sign-on and reduced sign-on to hopefully get the Microsoft Authenticator app up on the phone and just approve and say, oh, we are in, right? No, one less password. So what do you think? In terms of the ecosystem, right? I mean, this is not just you offering the service, but making it generally available for consumers, basically to adopt. And I think that's where we can get the scale, right? Because you just explained about the scenario where you have passwordless at Microsoft at your work, but when you come back to home, you have to go find that last password or something similar to host that 100, and then to find out the one that you used. So where do you think the overall ecosystem is in terms of making passwordless really scale up?
Yeah, I think that it's definitely expanding out. So, there is Microsoft, Hello or Windows Hello for Business, and being able to expand that out. There's also looking at things like the Fast Identity Online, which is a consortium. It's not a Microsoft standard. It's a consortium standard, and that one allows additional extensibility. So if you're not, for example, using a Surface, or you're not using some kind of a PC with the Trusted Platform module, a TPM, FIDO and intersection with FIDO allows that extension to devices that don't necessarily have TPMs. It also allows for extension to different use cases. So looking on your laptop, I mentioned a lot of workers, our laptop is our laptop. We don't share it unless our coworker has lost access to their laptop and they need to send an email quick as we watch them if they're touching our machine, right? We protect our own systems very closely, but that's not the use case in every environment. Yeah. So passwordless needs to be able to extend to environments where you may have 100 people on the same system, and that sounds a little odd. Like, where do we have? But when you think about how we use systems, it's not always as a laptop. It can be as a cash register, for example, or a medical device, or a shared kiosk. How do I find directions from this part of the airport to another part of the airport? Or I'm renting a car at the airport. How do I get directions to where I need to go? If you don't have GPS and you want to print it out from a kiosk. So those kinds of devices, and being able to expand passwordless into those use cases then brings forward, again, this extensibility with things like FIDO. So you can use a USB key, like a YubiKey, for example, plug that in, and then that is now the way that you're able to take advantage of passwordless. So it's thinking about the different use cases, the different hardware and security concerns that users have, and how to extend that out to all the different constituents and users.
Right. And I think you mentioned something very tangible here, right? I mean, passwords, typically the one that right? When you authenticate ourselves, and it's the knowledge factor. Password is a knowledge-based authentication mechanism, and then what you have is what you're adding to it, and then again, you can extend it to who you are, and that's how you get the full multi-factor authentication. And for those viewers or listeners who are in the business, they're probably familiar with the multi-factor, but I think break it down to passwordless doesn't mean that you just forget or discount or discontinue what you know, because that's an essential factor itself, right? It has to be augmented with what you have and what you are, who you are, right? The three factors.
Absolutely. And the other thing with the way that we've envisioned passwordless is that, it does start with there is a password or PIN still exists, but the difference between a password and a PIN in the Microsoft passwordless world is that it's not just, is it a set of numbers or not, but is it tied to a particular device and then tying that PIN into that device. And so passwords themselves, there can still be there as almost like a recovery key, but they're not there as something that is used as the what you enter every single time. You get this greater freedom to be able to use something like a biometric to log into authenticate into your machine. That unlocks the cryptographic key, and that's then used for the access.
Mm-hmm. So, Diana, we talked about the security part of it and the user experience part of it. How does it does it change security in general? I mean, does it when you say passwordless, are we compromising or are we exposing ourselves to any kind of risk with respect to security, or is it an extended version or it an enhanced security? I mean, what's the position?
As with anything in security, it's trade-offs, and organizations always have to sit down and look at the threat model and make their own assessment. But you can actually enhance security with passwordless for a couple of reasons. The first and most critical reason is that when you ask people to remember really difficult passwords, and they need to remember multiple of those very difficult passwords, and they need to change those at some set short latency at time, like say every 30 days. Human beings are not great at remembering odd collections of numbers and characters, especially as they get longer and longer. And people use some mnemonic kind of things like support. I had a boss years and years ago who was grumpy when he was changing his password one day, and it started out with, it was the first letter of the phrase, "The internet will save us all." So you can have a phrase like that. If you're the kind of person that memorizes poetry or songs, that could be something. But what do most people end up doing? They either forget the password, and then they're calling the help desk, or they're always doing self-service reset, which can take overhead and time, or using weak-ish passwords, so passwords that may follow a particular pattern. And if somebody can figure out your pattern, like the name of your dog plus a number, right? That number, now they've got the name of your dog and the number. So it's just now they're kind of have to brute force through a series of maybe 1 or 2 digit numbers. And the other big thing that people do is we write them down. Human beings, of course, how are you going to remember something? I'm holding a pen in my hand right now. We do this because it helps us to remember. And all of those things are actually security risks. So by taking that out of the equation, if you have a password, and in some cases, we recommend not even changing your password every year. If you have a password that doesn't change, you can make it difficult to remember, because you can lock in that one hard to remember thing and not have to remember again every 30 days to reset. So in that sense, it can prevent this reuse or sort of the weak-ish password kind of problem. Another thing is that because passwords themselves are potentially, they can be stolen, they can be figured out. When you're using just a single factor of authentication, password is multi-factor, passwordless is multi-factor. When you're using just a user ID and password, that's a vulnerability, because if somebody steals that password, right, they can get in and they're you. If you're not using a second factor, then I've got your credentials.
Yeah, you won't even know that it's gone, right, until the damage is done, probably, right?
Absolutely. And then another way that it can increase your security is if you combine the passwordless approach with conditional access. So you're looking at the activity of that user on the back end. So you've let them in, but then every time they're going to access something at a different security level or security layer, you can create conditional access and reassess whether or not they're going to have access to that device or that system, and then step up the authentication if you need to. So I may be A-okay to get into my email, but if I then go to a document that's at a higher sensitivity level, depending on where I'm coming in from and how I authenticate it, there may be a desire to say, you know what, this looks like I need to increase the security, so I'm going to use step-up authentication. Or perhaps somebody is in a risky area, you know what location they're in, because Passwordless is looking at, and Conditional Access looking at different aspects of the login and the user activity. So maybe it's you and me back in Tel Aviv, the way that we were at the beginning of the year, and on a device that maybe is coming in over an unsecured or an untrusted wireless network at a hotel, for example. And maybe we're allowed to read our email, but we're not allowed to access those more sensitive documents. So Passwordless becoming this part of a whole larger strategy around zero trust and around conditional access. Again, it can step you up. So as you and I know, right, there's no easy, I can't say it's definitely going to be more secure, but it can absolutely be part of a program that does give you increased security over password, plain old passwords.
Absolutely. I think that's a very, very comprehensive, response. I think a couple of things that I touched upon, you touched upon that I want to draw out is a little bit change in the approach to passwords, right? That you emphasized, and I think that's already on the Microsoft knowledge books and support sites that not having to change the passwords on 30 days. I think it's a standard now as well. So with that angle, Diana, how about the enterprise aspect of it, right? I mean, I think here you have a pretty broad service, and then those tools and services are already out there that can be used both by consumer and enterprises. And I think when you talk about enterprises, their approach is going to be quite different than somebody just picking up a phone and deciding to go passwordless, right? What is your advice for enterprise? The CISOs and the cyber leaders, as well as the business executives who are going to be including passwordless in either in their strategy, in their cybersecurity strategy, or overall business transformation as they move from, like, say, for example, moving from data center to an Azure cloud, right? So that I think that's a good transformation pivotal point where you can start considering passwordless.
Yeah, I think that every company needs to think about what it is, what's most important for their organization, where they're going to get the biggest wins. Passwordless is, I'm one of the few people that actually does appreciate passwords. So most of the time when you talk about passwordless, you've got a huge set of support. Most users are thrilled to get the idea of getting past passwords. So if you're talking to your executives and to your board about why you want to put this on the agenda and put it on a part of the digital transformation, it is one of those activities that for the most part gets a lot of executive support because, again, not having to remember the password. So that's a good place to start, and then think about where to start to insert it, the change, and understand that no change is going to be easy. There are going to be some cultural, and technical challenges that are going to follow as the organization proceeds down the path. But looking at what those benefits will be for the organization, and what, as the adoption of different and newer technologies, as you mentioned, like things like, going into the cloud, how that can support and really advance that transformation for the organization.
Right. Thank you for that answer, Diana. The other thing that I wanted to kind of lay down for our listeners and viewers is when when you move from this technology at an end user level, right? There's a lot of support, and there's definitely a good reception. But when you're thinking about implementing, you have to think about at what all levels it goes to, right? One is the end user. Then there is also you have vast infrastructure which has privileged access and all that, where you need to take a little bit more phased approach to roll this out, right? Any recommendations or suggestions, or even challenges that you'd ask people to think about when it comes to rolling it out in the enterprise at a more infrastructure level?
Yeah, any company that's been through a single sign-on or reduced sign-on process has probably already seen and felt a little bit of this. But you have to understand and identify what are all of the systems that my users are going to need to log into? Because for passwordless to work, you want to have them to really give that experience to them, not just, oh, you can be passwordless to this small subset of what you're doing at your job, but then this other larger subset is not going to be connected. So do an assessment of what systems need to be included. There are going to be legacy systems in most organizations. Some of them you could bring in with approaches similar to single sign-on and gateways. Some of them it may not be possible, so you have to really go back and assess what's happening with the org, what systems people need to log into. And importantly, plan for, even if you can't get to 100% passwordless today at your organization, that doesn't mean not to start the process. So once you've enumerated what systems people need to log into, what kinds of authentication those use, whether or not they can be brought into the passwordless system, it's okay if some can't, but keep planning for the future, because some companies will say, well, only half of our systems are really ready, or we're only about 50% ready. That's all right, because what you create is your strategy and your plan going forward. If we constantly get stuck in this spin cycle of it's not perfect, it's not 100% coverage, so I'm not even going to start until I get 100%, you keep sort of repeating this legacy problem again and again. Whereas if you take those steps and you start the path, then over time, organizations that may not be 100% now will be in the future 100%. So I would say understand what people log into. Some may not fit in your passwordless journey yet, but as you go forward, it's quite possible that they will. And in the future, certainly as you plan forward in passwordless, the new systems that you bring on will be supported for passwordless authentication.
Yeah, I think that fully endorse that journey. As you outlined, I think you cannot. The big bang approach doesn't work here. In many cases, it doesn't at all. But in this case, particularly, right, you have to choose which applications, which part of the business, and which users you want to. Either you go with a small slice of application that a lot of users can get access to, make a lot of end users happy, or you want to make an end-to-end infrastructure journey where you can have a particular set of users, but a significant business infrastructure passwordless. So that's great to know. Kind of a great validation. So we got a few minutes left. I think I want to touch upon something that we all both care about very well, and I do know that you do very well. Is that let's move from technology to talent. I think we talked about a little bit of the vision. We talked about kind of a strategy to approach passwordless. We talked about the technology itself and how to go around implementing it. But nothing is possible without having the right people in your team, right? And that's something that I believe jointly we really are passionate about. We spoke about also how very quietly but very swiftly Microsoft has assembled some of the most leading ladies of cyber, I would say, with a phenomenal team being built up. What is your kind of advice for people who are looking to bring in that diversity and also expand their footprint and making sure they make an impact in women in cyber or diversity in cyber?
Yeah, so for companies that are concerned about the diversity issue, two top-level pieces of advice. One is that the other side of diversity is inclusion. So if you're creating a really great hiring path, but you're not making sure that those more diverse hires are feeling very included and respected and listened to, you're going to get attrition. So keep that inclusion. Things like groups, ERGs for people to join, ensuring that people get trained. I mean, we spend a lot of time at Microsoft training ourselves on how to be inclusive, how to run inclusive meetings, how to listen and respect others. So that, again, diversity, great, but don't forget the inclusion. And then one that may not get picked up as often is be really cautious about how you're writing the job descriptions when you're going out to hire.
Very cool.
Because there's been a lot of research that shows that overall, breaking it down by gender, men are much more likely to apply for jobs that they don't have 90% of the written skill set requirements for. whereas women will try and hit at least that 90% or 100. So you want to be really careful how you're writing these job descriptions. A lot of managers, and I'm guilty of this in my past, you think, well, if I put down 10 things, I'll probably get people that have about 5 of them, and that's okay. We'll figure out the other 5. They can learn it on the job. But what happens when managers do that is that you get actually you're kind of cutting off candidates that may have 5 or 6 or 70%. So being careful about those job descriptions, that can really help quite a bit. And then for people that are thinking about getting into cybersecurity, that want to get into cybersecurity, I'm really happy to say that it's not sort of monoculture the way it was 20 years ago. People look pretty similar, and there weren't a lot of women in the field 20 years ago. So I'm really happy to see that we're a much more diverse culture. There are a lot of people out speaking, from different viewpoints, different cultures, different backgrounds, different experience coming into this, which is fantastic, because as you and I both know and believe so fully in our hearts, that this is a tough, complex problem, cybersecurity, and we need all the brains that we can get working on it. So for those people that want to get in, I would say I'm really glad it's a more inclusive field than it was, but also don't forget that it's a beyond technical field.
That's
so
right.
Cybersecurity is a business now, and that means that we need people like sociologists are helping to understand the mind of the attacker, or about the mind of the non-attackers. How do we learn? How do we become better security aware and less likely to click on a fish, for example? What's the psychology behind that? Things like graphic design matter. These are tough problems a lot in cyber tech. How do you
usability and user experience and all that. That the software developers are not going to probably be the best at it. So I'm thinking, and that opens the door up for so many others. And if I may add to it, we do large scale programs. We need really good program managers, project managers, technical writers. You can be a really creative person to actually translate all the amazing technology we built. But if you then don't put it down with the user experience, with the writing that supports it, and the marketing campaigns that actually make it meaningful for people to understand, I think we're leaving a lot behind, right? That's a lot of talent opportunities.
Exactly. Yeah.
So another aspect, especially with the pandemic and the crisis that we are in, that we are all kind of struggling through, whether in frontline or back end, cybersecurity people are usually back end people. We make sure that everything goes as smoothly as possible. We called in when something bad happens, more often than we would like to. But a lot of folks who are kind of in adjacent areas looking to get an inroad, an opportunity into cybersecurity career, I think could take this opportunity, right? Diana, any specific entry point that you would think that somebody who's interested in joining cybersecurity field or learning something that is durable, right? Cybersecurity is a long, durable career, I would believe. People can actually make and go to the executive levels. What are your thoughts on where we can have some adjacency and we can pull in people that they can go get some training now that will be actually useful, rather than trying to just advance their career in the same spot?
Well, you make a good point on training, and there are a lot of different outlets for people to go and get certified, whether it's things like CISSP from ISC Squared, or the CompTIA, Security Plus. SANS has some great boot camps, for example. So there's a lot of options for people if they want to get a certification prior to going into the field. And what they'll do when they're getting studying for the certification usually is they'll start intersecting with other people who are studying, so they can get a little, start to build their network. I would also say reach out to people to try and find a mentor to support you, to talk to you. I get reached out to a lot on LinkedIn. Unfortunately, I can't talk to everybody, but I talk to as many people as I can. And find someone who's got some time to spend with you and ask them about what their job is like, especially if it's a job that you think is interesting. And you're like, what is that like? What's your day-to-day? What kind of skills did you need to succeed in this field? Because it's sometimes just by talking to others is when you really start to find out, oh, I would like that, or I wouldn't like that. And to never give up with that talking. I still, when I'm talking to people, we were talking earlier about mentor peers, because as you get advanced in your career, sometimes you don't have these really advanced, when you're very young, it's most of your mentors have been in the field for a lot longer than you. But as you have been in the field for longer, you start getting mentor peers where you're kind of co-mentoring each other.
Yeah.
And I am lucky enough to have some great colleagues like that. And then we learn from each other. We'll talk about, well, what are you working on? And they'll explain what they're working on. And then that's a part, even though I've been in this field for 30 years, there are so many jobs that I haven't done. And by talking to my peers, I learn about what they're doing and what other things there are to do in the industry. So don't be afraid to reach out, talk to people, ask them what the day is like, and then think about, would I be happy doing that? And if you would, then either get the certifications or get the skills that you need to be able to do that job.
That's fantastic, great thought, and then thank you. What a great session. I just looked at the time. We are almost like 36 minutes into this, and I think we can pick up probably each topic, and that could be an hour in itself. But Dan, I think you're a busy person. I'll let you go back to your business. But it has been really great to have you. Had a chance to think about the time we spent and what we learned and how we shared those experiences, and also how we can make this a really important change happen to get into a passwordless cyberspace, which I'm really thrilled about now that we are able to use it. Thank you again for joining us, sharing your thoughts. Very important, both in terms of the technology, the strategy, the vision, and most importantly, the people. The wisdoms that you shared, I think, are going to be exceptionally useful. This program particularly is part of the Society of Mentors, and we had a lot of master mentors. So here is one more, and we are glad to have you. Thank you, Diana, for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Val.
Well, I'll conclude this program by sharing a couple of quick announcements. As you probably, a lot of you joined, and many of you joined us at the India CFFLive session launch. And that program is live now, and our recorded session is available on our YouTube channel. Please just look up CFF and YouTube, Cyber Future Foundation YouTube. The latest one addition is the global roundtable that we did. Later this week, we are preparing ourselves for the next two programs. Next week, we're going to have one of our good friends, Gerard Eschelbach, who's one of the originators of the zero trust theory, and will be there with us next Tuesday to demystify zero trust for us, because there's been a lot of I'd say confusion. And this is a industry of trust but verify, then it's a trusted network. So what is zero trust? So we'll talk about that next Tuesday at the same time. And next Thursday, we're going to have our next global session with Hans Willem Dunn from Germany. That will be our launch of the Germany program. And I also want to announce our annual summit coming up, and as you can probably imagine, this will be online this time. Of course, gives us a chance to talk to even more, reach out to more people. We are not constrained by any physical boundaries, and that will be at 28th of October to 30th October. We will start early, 7 a.m. On 28th, and go until 1 p.m. on the 30th of October. We are ramping up our preparation for that. We've already got about 100 speakers all coming back. And then we're going to add a number of very exciting sessions. What's most important about this year's summit, not only this is our 5th year, it brings about our 5th year end of the 5-year plan that we have, is bringing in, we are bringing in 10 different countries. So there will be 10 cyber hours. We've already had a Israel cyber hour, a UK, a Canada cyber hour, and India cyber hour. So you will have a lot of opportunity to collaborate with a lot of your colleagues and community from the Cyber Future Foundation. So again, thank you all for tuning in. I'll see how this, what you learned from here. Send us your feedback and remarks. And again, thank you, Diana, for joining us. Have a good rest of the day, all. Stay safe and be well. Thank you. Take care. Cheers. Bye-bye.